Well, hello. So a little bit about Rawls. Rawls is not that hard to read, right? Rawls is not that difficult to read. He's an American from the last, like, I don't know, wrote in the 70s, not that pretty contemporary, so not that difficult. Um, he is basing his theory on contract theory of like Locke and Rousseau and Kant, the classical contract theory. All right, so one of the biggest problems with the social contract theories, I mean, the idea with the social contract, if you haven't heard of it before, I would assume most of you probably have, is that everybody gets together at the beginning of the society, the imagined beginning of society, and comes up with a social contract of what is right and wrong and how the political system should be constructed. That too. Now, and one of the biggest arguments is what is the state of nature? That is, before everybody gets together and forms society, what is nature like? What are human beings like? Rousseau, for instance, thought of the noble savage, so he thought people are basically good. Hobbes, which I didn't put in here, Hobbes is like considered probably one of the first people that really got into this theory. Or started this theory, and he thought that people were basically terrible, and he said with life without a social contract or without a political system would be horrible. Life would be nasty, brutal, and short is the way he put it. So what were people like at the beginning? Look, the problem with this is there was no state of nature. Human beings evolved as social animals. So there was no point in history where we all came together and formed a social contract. It's an imaginary thing. And so Rawls says, let's make it an imaginary thing. This is the solution to this problem. Let's just do a thought experiment. We'll just do a thought experiment and imagine that everybody is in this initial, what he calls the initial position, or the original position. This is the total thought experiment. So everybody's in this original position. You don't know anything about anybody or yourself. That's the key to this. That's what keeps it fair. His motto is justice is fairness. And what keeps it fair is that when you're making these decisions, you have to imagine that you don't know one thing about yourself, not your sex, not your race, not your religion, nothing. What rules would you come up with? Okay, so there's the thought experiment. Now, the other things I want to point out is, okay, so you got the thought experiment. That's what he's kind of famous for, is this idea. But then he also, after that, he comes up with the idea of what rules will, he comes up with a list of what he thinks are going to be the rules, and this is where you get to the two basic principles, the equities and inequities idea. These are distinct in a way because, and he says this, it is possible that other people would do this thought experiment and not come up with the same principles that he does come up with. Okay. I would, this is true of everybody we've talked about, but I should quickly note, you should always be critical about these, what do you think? Be critical when you're reading these things. I'm a little skeptical of this, of both of these things. I mean, first of all, is it possible to imagine a situation where you didn't know anything about yourself? It's not crazy, but it's a little bit hard to imagine that you wouldn't bring any of your own biases or anything along with you when we're doing this thought experiment. And I don't want to diss it too much. It's an interesting idea, but it is maybe I don't know. Be a little critical. The other thing is, would everybody that does this thought experiment come up with these two basic principles, which sound a hell of a lot like the United States in terms of rights and things, when you're talking about rights, basic rights, and capitalism, when I don't think everybody in the world would probably, you know, I'm not sure if everybody in the world would come up with these two basic principles given the thought experiment. It is a very liberal, it actually sounds a little bit more like Western Europe than the United States, because he really emphasizes the compensating benefits part, which we don't do that much. Anyways, okay, so you come up with the basic principles from the thought experiment, then you look around and you weigh, you use that to basically see whether we're living up to those, right? So are we doing it the right way based upon these principles? Are we violating these basic principles that we would have come up with in this thought experiment? And that's going to be the way that you determine what's right and what's wrong. Now, all right, like I said, it's not that hard to read. One thing, I should quickly note, he does rule out utilitarianism, because he doesn't think that people would go for that in the initial position. Just let that go stand, I guess, and think about that. One thing that is interesting about Rawls, though, in terms of ethics, is that he does give us a basis, you know, a foundation for the idea of rights. Think about it. Lots of people like to refer to rights. I have a right to this. You know, these are my rights. I've got rights. Why do you have rights? What is the basis of your rights? Who gave you rights? You know, I mean, you could say the Constitution. All right, maybe, but it's not that obvious. You know, what are human rights? You know, why do you have any rights? And it's a notion that floats around a lot in terms of moral and ethical issues and debates. Well, that's one of the things that's kind of cool about Rawls, is he does give you some basis for why you have rights. There's an argument for why you have the rights that you have. So if you're kind of attracted to the notion of rights, Rawls provides it. He gives you something to lean on there. I mean, it's all good and well to say I have a right to this and that, but why? I mean, ever think about that? Why? Why do you have these rights? Rawls gives you something to stake your claim on there, right? He's got some reasoning behind that. Finally, I should also note that this is very deontological. Kant himself wrote on social contract theory, and Rawls' theory is pretty deontological and not consequentialist. Just to note that, he doesn't, but you know, just should point that out. All right, I'll leave you to it. Do that reading, and I think you'll find it's not that difficult, I hope.